Hello friends. If you've been following my channel, you'll know that I'm doing the year ending in fours, and I've already done several videos about 1984. The year-end Billboard Hot 100 of 1984 ended up being almost an hour long, and I've probably got at least another hour worth of videos talking about the albums and other stuff that I like from that year. And I am still not done. All of the biggest stuff you'll find in those other videos, so I'll try not to double up on any of this stuff. But I was going to just make a short video of a couple of things that I had missed, and that list grew and grew and grew and grew. So let's jump into some more 1984 stuff. One album that I have never heard. I've seen it one time. My dad had it on vinyl, or I don't know if he still does or not, but my dad had on vinyl was a band called Box of Frogs, which got on my radar because it includes guitar playing by Jeff Beck, and it ended up being the reunion of the three main Yardbird guys that hadn't played music together. Some of them hadn't played music since the 60s with the Yardbirds. And so that's kind of a significant album. The Colts' first album, Dreamtime, was released in 1984. And it was before they kind of became a hard rock band. They were more of like a goth type of gothy kind of band, I guess you would say. I've never heard this first album. I've heard some of the gothy stuff, and then obviously when they kind of switched gears and became straight rock, the Love album is like almost straight AC/DC rock. It's kind of a weird about face. Speaking of other alt rock type of bands from that time that I'm not really familiar with a lot of their music, you had Aztec Camera, Prefab Sprout, the Waterboys. Carl Wellinger from the Waterboys ended up forming World Party. He passed away this year. The Psychedelic Furs, I only know their big songs. Cockatoo Twins, I'm a huge fan of. I don't know anything about their early stuff though. It's early shoegaze type of stuff. Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark, or OMD. General Public had the song Tenderness. They were kind of a British third wave ska band, or they were kind of a combination of a couple of different bands. I read about it. I don't really remember the details. I know Mick Jones from The Clash was briefly a member of General Public. There was a band called Iceworks that I remember they had a song in the later part of the 80s. I had no idea they went back as far as 84, but they had a song that I found called Birds Fly, Whisper to a Scream, in parentheses. It was a really, really good song, and the more I listen to it, the more I think I remember it. I don't know if I'm just getting familiar with it, but I really, really like that song, Birds Fly. The Smiths' first album I mentioned in the album's video. Their first album was 1984, but my two favorite Smith songs are not on it. Please, Please, Please Let Me Get What I Want, and their signature song, How Soon Is Now, were both originally B-sides, and that kind of confuses me. David Bowie's album Tonight, I remember the song Blue Jean, and it always confused me. I didn't realize back in the day when I had seen that video on MTV, I was young, I didn't know. I knew some of David Bowie's hits, and I always confused it with Jean Genie. He had Blue Jean and Jean Genie. One's an old song, one's a newer song. But what I just recently discovered that Tonight album contains a cover of David Bowie doing my favorite Beach Boys song, God Only Knows. Christy McVie had a couple of big hits that year. After Fleetwood Mac had decided to take a little break, I knew Stevie Nicks was on fire through the early part of the 80s, but I had forgotten that Christy McVie also had some singles. Alphaville's Forever Young, that's a beautiful song. Hopefully I'll be doing a cover of that real soon. Hall & Oates' Out of Touch was the last big hit of their string of songs. I'm sure most of them were 82, 83, but the only big hit they had in 1984 was Out of Touch. I had mentioned Jack Wagner's All I Need. That's a beautiful song. 38 Special, Back Where You Belong. Most of their hits were earlier in the 80s, but that was one I had missed. The Pretenders' Learning to Crawl album had a few hits. They were kind of their big comeback after losing a couple of members to overdose, which was terrible. Christy McVie is a legend. Middle of the Road was one people kind of forget about. Back on the Chain Gang was the big one. And 2,000 Miles is kind of an adjacent Christmas song because she mentions Christmas in it. I don't really think of that as a Christmas song, but it goes on some Christmas lists because she mentions Christmas in it. And the video is kind of a snowy type of deal. I had mentioned the Streets of Fire movie in the Year of the Soundtrack video, and I had mentioned that Jim Steinman wrote the first and the last songs in the movie, Nowhere Fast and Tonight Is What It Means to Be Young, but somehow completely spaced off the coolest part of that movie being the Dan Hartman song I Can Dream About You, which was, as a song, was way more successful than that movie was as a movie. I love that song. Other Jim Steinman, Holding Out for a Hero, that would have been on the year-end Hot 100. Almost Paradise, that's another one of my favorite ballads, that was on the year-end Hot 100. Dead or Alive, Spin Me Right Round. Some facts I learned about that were it was produced by a couple of guys named Stock, Atkin, and Waterman, who collectively were known as the Hit Factory. And what I didn't know before, that I do know now, that I'm telling you now, is the Hit Factory was exactly that. Those three guys produced early Kylie Minogue stuff. They produced Venus by Bananarama, and they produced Rick Astley's Never Gonna Give You Up, which is amazing. Those guys had 100 top 10 singles in the UK over their career. INXS's Original Sin had Daryl Hall singing background vocals, was produced by Nile Rodgers. That was a couple years before they really blew up with their big stuff. I love INXS. I can't wait to cover that in the 87, I think, is when that Kick album was huge. The Kinks, Do It Again. I don't know how I could have forgot that. That's one of the last big hits that they had. I love that song. My dad is the hugest Kinks fan, so we listened to the crap out of that cassette back in the day. That song's really punchy and fun. I know because it was a big hit that I had mentioned Corey Hart's Sunglasses at Night, but I learned a few more facts about that song. It's actually came out originally in 1983, didn't really get big until 1984, but that song has some really, really dumb lyrics. The synth riff is basically Sweet Dreams by the Eurythmics, if you listen to it. And the guitar riff was stolen almost directly from Beat It. That part is straight from Beat It. But one of the big facts that I learned was that the guitar solo, the way that riff goes into that solo, it's kind of a wankin', shreddy kind of solo. You could tell they just used the blueprint of Beat It for it. But the guy that plays that solo is a guy named Andy Barnett, who has connections to Iron Maiden because he was in a band called Urchin. That is where Iron Maiden poached Adrian Smith from originally, and Dave Murray had played guitar with Urchin. They were kind of more of a UK cover band, I think. Never really got real big, but Iron Maiden, some Iron Maiden connections for that right there. The Sunglasses at Night song has become one of the pinnacle 80s songs. It's on every 80s playlist, and it's just kind of ubiquitous for the 80s now. But Corey Hart's Never Surrender was actually a bigger hit at the time. That's kind of weird. And Corey Hart has become sort of a superstar in Canada. He's as big as Bryan Adams in Canada. He's produced a ton of artists, including Celine Dion even. And he was one of the original people that they had thought of for the role of Marty McFly in Back to the Future. So there's a few fun facts for you. Michael Jackson and Michael Jackson and Paul McCartney's song Say, Say, Say was huge that year. And Paul McCartney's movie, Give My Regards to Broad Street, was kind of a failure. But it did have a hit song called No More Lonely Nights, which was until that stupid song that he did with Kanye and Rihanna just recently. Maybe that's even been 5 or 6 years now. That would have been his last big hit. And No More Lonely Nights also has a guitar solo by David Gilmour. And all of those big musicians were really kind of churning a bunch of stuff up at that time. David Gilmour's second solo album was that year, produced by Bob Ezrin. And people in his band include Pino Palladino, one of the greatest bass players ever, and he'll be mentioned again a little bit later. And Jon Lord, keyboard player from Deep Purple, who ended up going back with Deep Purple for the Perfect Strangers album in 1984. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Kansas had a new single called Perfect Lover that was only released on their Greatest Hits album. And they, like a lot of people, thought putting a new song on the Greatest Hits album would help with the sales. But it never ended up being a big hit, so it was dropped from the Greatest Hits album. until it was re-released in 2014 and they had restored it back onto the greatest hits. REO Speedwagon had their biggest year ever with Can't Fight This Feeling, the Wheels Are Turning album. I don't know why that wouldn't have been on the Hot 100 songs. That's crazy how big that, I remember that being. Survivor had come back with a new singer that Jamie Jameson, I think is his name. They obviously had the Eye of the Tiger in the one Rocky movie, but they did another couple of soundtracks. I think they had a song in the Karate Kid movie and another Rocky movie. But their big song that year was The Search Is Over, and that's a fun song. Julian Lennon's album Velat, Too Late for Goodbyes, and the song Velat, that was my mom's favorite for a long time. Paul Young, here's where I mentioned Palladino again. He's known for his fretless bass stuff, and Paul Young, obviously the next year he has Every Time You Go Away, his biggest song, but this year he had a song that I had never heard of called Gonna Tear Your Playhouse Down, which was a cover of a song by a girl named Ann Peoples. And he has that signature bass sound, fretless with an octaver. And there's a guy named PD Bass that covers a lot of bass stuff. And he does a whole video about the sound and the riff and the playing of Pino Palladino. And it's really interesting. The bass line was so significant in that song that they didn't even put a guitar track on that song. Oh, moving on. I mentioned Laura Branigan, I think. Self-Control. What a great song. Starts with a good rocky guitar hook. The bridges has an accent with the drums, and the her bigger hit was Gloria from the year before, but I'm preferential to Self-Control. Such a good song. Another interesting one is the Animotion song Obsession, which is kind of a new wave track. I didn't realize that that was written by Holly Knight and a guy named Michael DeBar, who has his footprints and fingerprints all over rock history. He's the guy that replaced Robert Palmer in the Power Station right after this. He actually had a version of this song on the Night in Heaven movie soundtrack, which that movie I don't think did very well, but Animotion covered it and got a big hit out of it. Tina Marie, that's one. Lover Girl. I had totally forgotten about that song. It's totally out of my wheelhouse, but I remember hearing that song all the time back in the day, and I thought it was cool. I was kind of shocked that I liked it because, like I said, it just totally wasn't in my wheelhouse. I mentioned all the Chaka Khan songs that actually got big and charted, but she also had another song that I never knew about called Through the Fire. The Jacksons, after Michael Jackson's big run with Thriller and all of those hits, made one final reunion with his brothers and had a hit with the song State of Shock. Actually toured with his brothers. I think that actually sort of was the tour for Thriller also. But didn't, in the zeitgeist, didn't really hold up. I don't think. I don't think people even like really remember that he got back with his brothers after Thriller. Obviously, I mentioned Purple Rain and Prince a whole bunch, but I failed to mention The Times, Jungle Love, and there was a lot of other R&B stuff that I didn't care about in 1984. KC and the Sunshine Band and Kool and the Gang, both holdovers from 70s disco. They were still having hits. Shalimar and DeBarge were both real huge, but totally not in my wheelhouse. 1984 was the year that the original The Roof is on Fire song came out. And I think in the back of my mind, always kind of wondered where that song came from. Obviously, now everybody really remembers it from the Bloodhound Gang version, but it was not really a cover. It's kind of more of an interpolation of the chorus, and they wrote their own song around it. The song itself is terrible. It doesn't really do anything except for the chorus. A big one that I wanted to talk about, because I learned several facts about, would be Murray Head and the song One Night in Bangkok. Murray Head is a one-hit wonder because of this song, but he actually has a long history in music. And the song One Night in Bangkok has a long history too. Murray Head was actually in the original run of Jesus Christ Superstar, and he's the brother of Anthony Head, who is Giles on the Buffy the Vampire Slayer TV show. And Anthony Head played in Gospel, the musical. So it's funny that the Head brothers were both in the two Jesus musicals. Anthony Head was also the guy that was in the commercials, if you remember the commercials from the 80s, where the coffee taster's choice and him and the woman were like, it was a whole series of commercials, almost like a soap opera developing. It was kind of a big deal back in those days. But back to the song One Night in Bangkok. It came from a play called Chess, which was written by Tim Rice and the guys from ABBA, of all things. And I never knew that came from a play, but I had a mystery for a long time, because Steve Vai has a song called Bangkok on his Fire Garden album that, reading interviews with him, I used to devour all those guitar magazines, especially stuff about people like Steve Vai. And he talked about transcribing this piece of music called Bangkok on his album. And he had no idea where it came from. He thought he wrote it and ended up transcribing it and put it on the album, and then found out that it was a big piece of music from this Chess musical. So there's a weird connection between one of my favorite guitar players, more of a progressive-y kind of thing, crossed with this pop hit from 1984. Go figure. And the last thing I want to talk about would be Trevor Horn. Trevor Horn, 1984, was a huge year for him. He produced Yes's 90125 that year. There's a YouTube channel called JCM that I was exposed to because he does these crazy deep dives on Led Zeppelin and all the Led Zeppelin albums, and he has footage that I don't know how he gets this bootleg footage and all this information, that he goes deeper than I've ever seen anybody go on Led Zeppelin and music in general. His videos are amazing. Go watch JCM. But his newest ones are about the 90125 album. And once again, he goes super deep dive. And I found out more about Trevor Rabin, the guitar player, than I ever knew before. That guy should have been a superstar in the 70s. He was an original member of Asia, who was also produced by Trevor Horn, and just near misses. He was originally part of so much stuff. Anyway, Trevor Rabin in 1984 produced the 90125 album. I'm not going to get into it because, like I said, go watch the JCM stuff. But he also produced the Art of Noise album. He was the first person to really mainstream use the Fairlight synthesizer. Peter Gabriel was the first person to buy one, and they were like $50,000, which is like almost $250,000 nowadays. But it was the first sampling, like, I can't even describe it. You got to look up the Fairlight synthesizer and read about it. But a lot of people used it, and all of the big, huge synth keyboard people that you would think of, John Paul Jones, Trevor Horn, Alan Parsons, Kate Bush, Richard Wright from Pink Floyd, Thomas Dolby, they all used the Fairlight. And if once you learn some of the sounds, you listen to the Art of Noise album, and all of those sounds are all Fairlight. And he also produced Relax by Frankie Goes to Hollywood that year, and those sounds are all over that. And all of the cool synth sounds that you hear on that song are all that Fairlight synthesizer. It's all Trevor Horn. He also produced the superstar Band-Aid, Do They Know It's Christmas, that year too. They obviously got all of the best musicians. Phil Collins plays drums, and John Taylor plays bass, and Midger wrote the song with Bob Geldof. And who did they get to play guitar? I forgot who it was that they had play guitar on that, but they got the best British producer that they could at that time, Trevor Horn. So anyway, I just hope this proves that 1984 was just such a jam-packed year. Go back and watch my other 1984 videos for music. And yeah, the next one will be, I'm still not done. The next one will be hard rock and heavy metal stuff that I missed from 1984. So I sure hope 1985 isn't this jam-packed. But I'm sure it will be. I'll catch you on the next one.